Verehrtes Publikum, haben Sie noch etwas Geduld? Wir warten noch auf unseren Finanzminister. Der hat Wert darauf gelegt, Sie persönlich zu begrüßen. Und jetzt warten wir noch 5 Minuten. Wenn nicht, dann fangen wir an. Aber die 5 Minuten sollten wir ihm noch geben. Danke. geht ja nichts über gute Dienstwagenfahrer, die die Abkürzungen kennen und die Staus und so weiter. Ja, liebe Freundinnen, liebe Freunde der Heidelberger Schlossgespräche, verehrtes Publikum, wir sind heute, wie Sie sehen, komplett ausgebucht. Ja, wir hätten den Königssaal zweimal füllen können. Wir hatten 1200 Anmeldungen bei 590 Plätze. Wir mussten also über 600 Interessierten leider absagen. Daher übertragen wir die Veranstaltung in den benachbarten Otto-Heinrichs-Bau und live, als Livestream ins Netz. So wie ich sehe, läuft das alles schon und auch Ihnen, muss ich da hinsehen, da draußen an den Monitoren herzlich willkommen. Es ist ein sehr besonderer Abend mit sehr besonderen, wunderbaren Gästen, die sich zu den 25. Heidelberger Schlossgesprächen im Königssaal eingefunden haben. Aus diesem Grund überlasse ich heute gerne die Begrüßung dem eigentlichen Hausherrn des Heidelberger Schlosses. Ich begrüße ganz herzlich in seiner Heimatstadt den Minister der Finanzen von Baden-Württemberg, Herrn Dr. Daniel Bayers. Herzlich willkommen. Herr Bayers, ich darf Sie auf die Bühne bitten. Mikrofon gehört Ihnen.
Herr Müller, ganz herzlichen Dank. Entschuldigen Sie die kleine Verspätung. Der Verkehr. Muss die Politik mal was machen. Darf Sie alle herzlich willkommen heißen zu den 25. Heidelberger Schlossgesprächen, Reden über Architektur. Und ich freue mich wirklich riesig bei dieser Jubiläumsveranstaltung hier in Heidelberg, in dieser wunderschönen Stadt, an diesem ganz besonderen Ort, Sie alle begrüßen zu dürfen. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, Sie wissen ja, wir alle in Baden-Württemberg, egal ob die Schwaben, die Badner oder die Kurpfälzer, wir neigen in der Regel ja zu Bodenständigkeit und zu Bescheidenheit, vor allem wenn man uns mit dem östlichen Nachbarland Bayern vergleicht. Heute sind aber mal Superlative angesagt. Ich glaube, heute dürfen wir mal selbstbewusst sein. Heute sind Superlative angesagt, denn ich habe mich nochmal versichert, Herr Müller, die Heidelberger Schlossgespräche sind die bestbesuchteste Architekturveranstaltung. Und ich sage das auch deswegen mit Blick auf unseren östlichen Nachbarn. Ja, wir in Baden-Württemberg, wenn man Landespolitik in Bavü macht, dann leidet man immer ein bisschen unter Minderwertigkeitskomplexen, weil wir uns mit diesem selbstbewussten Nachbarn natürlich immer gerne benchmarken. Aber das kann ich uns natürlich nicht ersparen, an der Stelle einfach mal zu sagen, wir machen das heute auch in diesem besonderen Ort, dass das meistbesuchte Schloss deutschlandweit ist. Ja, vor Neuschwanstein. Das Schloss kennt jeder auf der Postkarte von Disneyland, aber an der Stelle darf man das mal so sagen. Sie merken, ich bin mit einer Münchnerin verheiratet. Das Selbstbewusstsein kriegt man auch dann abends noch zum Abendessen immer unter die Nase gestrichen. Das war jetzt auch mal für mich. Ich musste das hier einmal dokumentieren. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Aber ich fasse nochmal zusammen, das passt einfach. Die bestbesuchteste Architekturveranstaltung im bestbesuchten Schloss. Also es gibt, glaube ich, keinen besseren Ort, um sich genau darüber, über Architektur auszutauschen. Und diese Heidelberger Schlossgespräche, ja, die strahlen weit auch über die Region hinaus. Das Schloss und die wunderschöne Stadt leisten, glaube ich, da auch ihren Beitrag und tragen dazu ganz konkret bei. Und wie Sie schon sagten, Herr Müller, heute ist deswegen ein ganz besonderer Abend mit ganz besonderen Gästen. Und die will ich selbstverständlich auch noch ganz kurz begrüßen, bevor wir natürlich zu unserem Ehrengast kommen. Ich begrüße stellvertretend für unseren Co-Veranstalter, den Oberbürgermeister der Stadt Heidelberg, Herrn Professor Eckhard Würzner. Lieber Eckhard, uns verbindet ja nicht nur die Liebe zu dieser Stadt, sondern auch den Basketball und das ein oder andere. Schön, dass ich dich heute auch hier begrüßen darf. Mitveranstalter auch die Architektenkammer Baden-Württemberg und der Bund Deutscher Architektinnen und Architekten. Begrüße den Vizepräsidenten der Architektenkammer Baden-Württemberg, Herrn Stefan Weber, und den Ehrenpräsidenten und den heutigen Moderator der Schlossgespräche, Herrn Wolfgang Riele. Ein herzliches Willkommen auch an die Vertreterinnen und Vertreter der mitveranstaltenden SRH-Hochschulgruppe hier in Heidelberg. Und aus meinem Haus, so viel Zeit muss sein, begrüße ich den obersten Baumeister des Landes, nämlich Herrn Professor Kai Fischer, und den Leiter des Bundesbaus Baden-Württemberg, Herrn Christian Kaiser. Das sind zwei Herren, die gerade die Hände über den Kopf zusammenschlagen, weil die Politik auf einmal jetzt sehr viel Geld herbeigezaubert hat. Und das sind zwei, die es irgendwie ausgeben müssen. Wir haben 8000 Liegenschaften im Land und es kommen ständig welche hinzu. Der Bundesbau, um jetzt mal einen ernsten Aspekt zu betonen, macht auch unheimlich viel im militärischen Bereich, also Bundeswehrstandorte auch bei uns im Land. Und deswegen lastet da auch eine große Verantwortung, denn das Geld herbeizaubern, wenn ich das mal so salopp sagen darf, das ist der einfache Teil. Die schwierige Arbeit, die kommt jetzt, die fängt jetzt an und das kann man mit den Kolleginnen und Kollegen sicherlich vielleicht noch am Rande noch etwas vertiefen, wer daran Interesse hat. Will weitermachen mit den Begrüßungen. Federführend organisiert die Veranstaltungsreihe Vermögen und Bau Baden-Württemberg, konkret das Amt Mannheim und Heidelberg. Ich begrüße dessen Leiter und den Nachfolger von Ihnen, Herr Müller, Herrn Marco Grüppel. Und ich begrüße außerdem die Geschäftsführerin der staatlichen Schlösser und Gärten Baden-Württemberg, Frau Patricia Albert, die sich, glaube ich, um die 63 Monumente, die wir im Land haben. Habe übrigens erst gelernt, als ich Minister wurde, dass das Schloss dem Land und nicht der Stadt gehört. Also man lernt auch immer Neues im Job dazu. Und Frau Albert kümmert sich genau um diese Monumente. Ja, und die Gesamtleitung der Heidelberger Schlossgespräche liegt in den Händen von Ihnen. Sie sind der Initiator, Herr Müller. Sie haben ehrenamtlich die bisher 25 Schlossgespräche und zusätzlich mehrere Ausstellungen zu dem Thema im In- und im Ausland erfolgreich kuratiert, organisiert, auf die Beine gestellt. Und durch Sie bekommen die Heidelberger Schlossgespräche sogar ein Franchise. Ja, wir machen also nicht nur an den Landesgrenzen statt, da darf man mal applaudieren. Durch Sie bekommt das ein Franchise und zwar in Berlin, in unserer Landesvertretung, wo die Schlossgespräche dann auch in dem entsprechenden Format umgesetzt werden. Und deswegen an der Stelle ganz herzlichen Dank für Ihren wirklich unbezahlbaren Einsatz. Und auch wenn Sie im verdienten Unruhestand sind, ich zähle weiter drauf, dass Sie auch noch viele, viele weitere Schlossgespräche mitorganisieren. Ja, begrüßen möchte ich auch die Geschäftsführerin der Baden-Württemberg-Stiftung, Frau Theresia Bauer, und die Geschäftsführerin ihrer Stiftungen, Frau Gerda Tschirra, der in Heidelberg nicht nur dieses Schloss, sondern die gesamte Stadt und die Menschen am Herzen liegt. Und Finanzminister hat natürlich auch mal ein bisschen den Job, auf der Kasse zu sitzen und zu gucken, dass das Kessel und die Finanzlage stabil bleibt. Und deswegen gehört es natürlich auch dazu, solche Veranstaltungen so zu organisieren, dass wir ein paar Sponsoren haben, die da uns kräftig mit unterstützen. Quasi als Gründungsmitglied der Schlossgespräche sorgt bei der Veranstaltungsreihe die Volksbank Kurpfalz für das finanzielle Gerüst. Und ich begrüße den Vorstand der Bank mit 70 Kunden, habe ich mir sagen lassen, die heute hier anwesend sind. Großes Dank für dieses großartige finanzielle Engagement, auf das wir uns jetzt schon seit 14 Jahren und hoffentlich auch viele, viele weitere Jahre an der Stelle fest verlassen können. Weiterer Sponsor konnten wir die Gesellschaft für Grund- und Hausbesitz in Heidelberg gewinnen und bedanken möchte mich ganz besonders beim Vorbereitungsteam, beim Beratergremium, das die Schlossgespräche inhaltlich vorbereitet hat, der Technik, den fleißigen Helfern aus dem Amt Mannheim und Heidelberg, der Stadtverwaltung, der Architektenkammer, dem Bund Deutscher Architektinnen und Architekten, der Schlossverwaltung bis hin zum Shuttle-Service. Ohne die Kolleginnen und Kollegen würde hier gar nichts gehen. Ohne die funktioniert so eine Veranstaltung nicht. Und da dürfen wir, glaube ich, auch gemeinsam alle einmal herzlichen Danke sagen. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, let me switch to English. Enough of the advertisement, enough of thank yous. Let's get to business. Let's welcome our guest of honor. He's from the city of London. He's just arrived from Santiago de Compostela, a living legend of architecture and a Pritzker Prize winner, Sir David Chipperfield, and his wife, Dr. Evelyn Stern. Welcome to you, to the land. Welcome to the beautiful city of Heidelberg. When I arrived, Mr. Chipperfield said he's nervous. Mr. Chipperfield, believe me, I'm the person who's nervous today. And you know Baden-Württemberg pretty well, especially from your time as a professor of architecture at the State Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart. And you therefore have a pretty good feeling what kind of buildings the people from Baden-Württemberg love. Let me follow up with a couple of examples. I myself was able to visit the new cultural center of the German Consulate General 1014 in the wonderful city of New York. The Bundesbau Baden-Württemberg is responsible for the project, and I think it's an important signal at this point of time where we live in, let me put it in diplomatic words, where we live in difficult transatlantic relations, and I think this is a very, very important project in this period of time. And of course, everyone knows another example, the outstanding Museum of Modern Literature in Marbach am Neckar, next to the Schiller Archiv, and it's drawing a fine line from poets like Friedrich Schiller to living legends like the rap group Advanced Chemistry, which is here from the city of Heidelberg. And thank you for this great piece of architecture. Yeah, today we are looking forward to a lecture and the discussion afterwards. And it is an honor to have you with us. I wish you, all of us, an insightful and entertaining evening with this outstanding architect and an inspiring human being. Mr. Riele, please take the stage and introduce Mr. Chipperfield to us. Thank you very much.
I don't have to switch, I start in English. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this, the 25th Jubilee of the Heidelberg Castle Talks. I have the honor of introducing and interviewing our guest this evening, a man you know all well, a superstar in the world of architecture, Sir David Chipperfield. I'm very glad to welcome you, Sir David, to the 25th Heidelberg Castle Talks. Sir David Allen Chipperfield is one of the best-known architects, you already heard from our Minister of Finance, in the world. In March 2023, he was awarded the prestigious Pritzker Prize, the so-called Nobel Prize in Architecture. I would like to give you a short portrait of David Chipperfield and his most famous building as an introduction to this evening. David was born in December 1953 in London. He moved with his family at the age of 4 to a farm in the Devon countryside. Later, he went to boarding school in Somerset and then studied architecture at the Kingston School of Art and the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London. From 1978 to 1984, he worked for Douglas Stephen, Richard Rogers, and Sir Norman Foster before founding his first office in London in 1985. 40 years ago, which is another jubilee to celebrate this year. Congratulations. The London office was followed by branches in Berlin since 1987 and later in Shanghai since 2005 and Milan since 2006 under the name David Chipperfield Architects. He lives in London, Berlin, and Santiago de Compostela in Galicia, Spain. So I would say that he is a world citizen with his offices and commissions all over the world. Okay, soll ich vielleicht über dieses sprechen oder können Sie es hochdrehen? Gut. Gerne. Chipperfield is married to the Argentinian Dr. Evelyn Stern, who I'm very pleased to say is in the audience this evening. Welcome, dear Evelyn. David's architecture stands for clarity, minimalism, classical modernism, and timeless design, and at the same time for a successful combination of the old and the new, which has been an important focus of ours at the Heidelberg Castle Talks since the beginning. So this Jubilee evening, we can say that we are connecting to the root to this institution. In addition to his work as a designer and architect, David Chipperfield teaches at architecture colleges around the world and gives lectures. Among them, at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University in Cambridge, USA, at the State Academy of Fine Arts in Stuttgart, you heard it already, the so-called Kunstakademie between 1995 and 2001, and at the Mies van der Rohe Chair of the Escola Técnica Superior de Arquitectura in Barcelona. In 2017, he founded Fundación RIA, a private non-profit organization that promotes meaningful economic, environmental, and cultural development in Galicia, which is located in the northwest of Spain. I am personally looking forward to hearing more about this foundation this evening. David Chipperfield is a member of the Royal Institute of British Architects and an honorary member of both the American Institute of Architects and the Association of German Architects, the BDA. He has also received numerous awards. I'll just name a few, otherwise you'll hear all night. As I have already mentioned, he was awarded the Pritzker Prize in 2023, the Mies van der Rohe Prize in 2011. Also in 2011, the German Architecture Prize for the reconstruction of the Neues Museum in Berlin. In 2010, the DAI Grand Prize for Building Culture for his complete works. And also in 2010, a knighthood for services to architecture in the UK and Germany, making him Sir David Chipperfield. Chipperfield's buildings can be found all over the world, not only in the UK and Germany, but also in Japan, South Korea, Mexico, China, Spain, and the USA. His subtle adaptation of traditions for contemporary architecture has brought him to the forefront of the architectural elite. David Chipperfield's work shows a particular focus on cultural buildings, but also in between residential and commercial buildings. I will mention only a selection of his most well-known architectural works here, which he and his team have realized in the last 20 years. So, the extension building of the Kunsthaus Zürich, Switzerland, the basic refurbishment of the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, which was originally designed by Mies van der Rohe, the James Simon Gallery on the Museum Island in Berlin, the Tyrol department stores in Innsbruck, Austria, a project by the investor René Benko, the America's Cup building Vedes Events in Valencia, the City of Justice in Barcelona, the extension of the Museum Folkwang in Essen, the reconstruction, you will show us, I'm quite sure, some charts of this project, the reconstruction of Neues Museum on Museum Island in Berlin, and the museum, we heard it from the Minister of Finance, of Modern Literature in Marbach am Neckar, quite near to Heidelberg. Sir David has also published numerous books and articles. He was editor for the Domus magazine for many years. And with David Chipperfield Design, he has also created products and furniture, for example, for Alessi, Cassina, Zumtobel, and others. So now I'd like to invite Sir David up to the podium to enlighten us more about his architectural practice, his current projects, and his foundation. And afterwards, in our interview, I'll be asking him about his attitude to architecture, his relationship to nature, his vision for the future, and more. So please welcome Sir David Chipperfield.
Wolfgang, thank you very much for that Herr Minister, Bürgermeister, thank you so much. I'm very impressed how many people are here. It makes me extremely nervous to see you all. Bernd Müller this morning or yesterday said that they've been trying to get me here for more than 15 years. I think I should have come earlier. Not only to be more polite, but I think I would have found it easier 10 years ago to talk about architecture. Architects are the same as everybody else. We're all having to rethink how we react to the crisis of global warming and environment. And in the construction industry, which we are part of, the construction industry contributes nearly more than 40% of carbon emissions. So whether we like it or not, we are part of a problem. And where does that put us? So if Bernd, I came 10 years ago, I probably would have just shown you some projects. This is my latest museum in Mexico. This is my latest opera house. This is my latest. But I don't think this is relevant so much anymore. And I think, so what I've been thinking about for the last 10 years, 7 years, is how the architects participate more in these difficult times, not only in terms of environment and global crisis, but also the second crisis that we have, which is social inequality. And in many places, this crisis is just as dangerous as the first one. So I've been talking a lot in the last few years and trying to think about how do these conditions affect architectural practice. In what way should we consider the way that we operate? This is not to question in any way the importance of architecture itself. I've never lost the confidence that with materials, in this case concrete, and with windows and with space and with light, architects are capable of making our environment, not an environment, and not buildings that we necessarily spend our time looking at, but spaces where we experience life. Architecture is a frame, and making that frame requires us to consider many things. So we can't underestimate the importance, and if we're in a castle like this, we certainly can't. And a city as beautiful as this, we can't underestimate how important the physical environment is, how important buildings are, and how important the collection of buildings that might go together to make a city. So, on that subject, is architecture, is it about buildings, or is it about buildings coming together to make a city? You're fortunate in this city to have both. You've got buildings of great quality, and they conspire together to create something which also has a collective quality, the quality of a city. In a way, Bernd Müller took us around this morning, and it's a sort of, it's a sort of city you would draw as a fantasy. You know, it has a river and it has a castle and it has the hills and it has all these nice buildings. I mean, it's a sort of children's. It's, if you ask people what a city should be like, I think you might draw Heidelberg. You probably wouldn't draw this. Under no pressure would anyone draw that. So why do we have it? What happened to my city? What happened to the city that was coherent at one point? Money. Simple. Investment. Those are not buildings. They are the leveraging of land value. They are to do with the fact that each piece of that land could be exploited and translated into something else. So what we have then are buildings which are not generated because of there's an idea of what a city should be, but because we need now investment energy. So London found itself in a very Anglo-Saxon position of wanting investment and encouraging investment. And in that sense, it relaxed the idea of planning. In many ways, this is a universal problem. It's just, in this case, we lead the world. We managed to do this better and more forcefully than anybody else, which was to relax planning control and encourage planning, encourage investment. I think all mayors have to deal with this. We can't not have investment. We need investment. But speaking from a position of an architect, I would say now that we find ourselves as architects inevitably working in this way, that we are working more and more for the interests of investment and development than we are for the interests of society and community. In the Anglo-Saxon world, this is extreme, because in the Anglo-Saxon world, especially in England after Thatcher, the role of the public was diminished and replaced by the importance of the private. And this defines, I think, the Anglo-Saxon world separately to the European world, where there is still, in my experience in Germany, there's still an idea of what a city should be like. So the question, the focus of architecture in the last 30 years has been on single buildings. I would say the profession has become very sophisticated. I would say there are more good architects now than there ever has been. There's probably more good buildings. I would say the quality of investment architecture is better than it's ever been. The investment buildings of this period are better than the investment buildings of the 1960s. But the question is, what do those buildings add up to? What type of world are we building? I don't think we worried too much about that for a long time. But now, of course, with the crisis of climate, we are having to think again. Without the crisis, I think we probably wouldn't stop to think, and we would carry on investing. But I think now we have to think again about what we build, where we build, how we build, what materials we use to build. And this is the challenge of our time, in a way. That's not just in terms of cities, that's in terms of how we deliver housing. Again, this is an Anglo-Saxon solution. We have a housing shortage. Who builds houses? They're called, in England, they're called house builders. And they build houses. But that's not a city, that's not a town. there's not a village, there's no school, there's no idea of community, there's no idea of society. And in fact, I'm very nervous at the moment that in England they will build more and more houses. This used to be a field, and you build a house, and you need a car to get there, and probably not in the right. This happens when you don't have planning, and when you don't want to think about the consequences, the environmental consequences and the social consequences. So as architects, are we happy just to design a house or design a tower in this situation? Especially now, we're understanding that what this situation is producing is environmental and societal stress. I've got to read this one. So, yes, we have to enjoy architecture. Architecture is important, but it's not important on its own. It's got to be part of a bigger idea. In my work, if I was giving this talk 10 years ago, I would just show you projects like this, and again, I can explain some of these projects because not just because of their formalism, not just of the material or the cleverness of the design, but I would hope to think that most of our projects, or as many projects as possible, have some sort of social idea. This is the headquarters for the BBC in Scotland, and I changed the program in such a way that we moved the program around to create a working environment that was not just in terms of offices, but also in terms of the central spaces, to create a sort of communal space. This was nearly 20 years ago, so this is a common discussion now. The workplace, the quality of workplace is not just a desk, but where we meet. But 20 years ago, this was quite a difficult argument. It was mentioned before, the building we did in Valencia, the city wanted a symbol to create a new development towards the sea. Valencia was never, although it depended on the sea, it was never physically well connected, and the city wanted to develop the port into a leisure area, and the America's Cup was part of that. We were asked to do a symbolic building for the America's Cup. And I argued that a box for privileged people couldn't really be a great symbol for the idea that the city came to the city. So we made a building that was, in a way, not a building. It was about platforms and balconies, and where people could come and watch the races, a bit like a sort of grandstand. So we changed the building from a sort of exclusive place to an open place. And that forced us then to think about how would we make the architecture to support that. I suppose the other thing that I should talk about a little bit at this point in my career, that I think that there's a sort of sense that architecture is the work of sort of brilliant people, brilliant single architects, and of course it's not. Architecture is probably the most collective of all of the activities one can do, beyond being a politician, I suppose. But insofar as we have to develop our own team, we have to work with clients, we have to work with planners, we have to work with contractors. It's a totally collaborative activity. And therefore, I think it's even more important that our work is demonstrated to have relevance. But when you start your practice, this was the first studio, and when you start your practice, you have to develop your ideas, and part of that development of ideas is theoretical, and part of it is practical. And I think this is, in a way, something we all deal with, is realities and ideals. And in architecture, those two things feed each other. One without the other is sort of pointless. And this is how I began my practice, was working with projects. And at this point, one wasn't necessarily so, I mean, you wanted to build, but at the same time, you were trying to think about for what reason and what were the theoretical basis of your work. And maybe also, I was in a situation in England in the early 80s, middle 80s. We had a recession. There was not much construction, so we had a lot of time to think. So we did a lot of, I did a lot of writing, and I had small projects. I worked in Japan, and I did things there, and I developed practice. The reason I'm saying this now is because I think that we have to understand in a way that practice is a sort of empirical process, and we learn through practice ideas. Ideas are not brought from nowhere. And in architecture, those ideas have to be based in practice. How you build a building, it requires technique. How you persuade and discuss with a client, it's also a practical engagement. The thing that also I want to address is that architecture in the last 30 years has been something very visual, and in our very mediated environment with social media and everything else, we are living more and more in a sort of virtual world, where we are more and more influenced by image. And I would say that architecture has not been immune to that. So that a lot of architecture has responded to this appetite of, let's say, spectacle. When we propose architecture, when we compete for projects, we're not competing with realities. It's not like being a painter. You can't paint the painting and then see if someone likes the painting. We have to talk about what the building may be like. So we can only speculate, and we can only describe things. We can't prove that a building will be good. We have to somehow promise. And the visual dimensions are easier to communicate than the physical ones. It's very difficult to say, relax, it's going to be very nice, it's going to be a beautiful building, it's going to have a very nice physical quality, the atmosphere is going to be nice. And every client says, yeah, but what's it going to look like? What material, what color? How does it look? We inevitably judge things by what they look like. In reality, architecture is experienced. This thing is slipping off my head, I think. In reality, architecture is experienced, it's physical. It's finally judged not by pictures and things, but how it feels. It's an experiential thing. And this has become a very difficult thing for us to communicate. And it's very difficult for clients to choose work based on a sort of promise that it will be a nice building. They want to see what will it look like. And therefore, we have, I think, gravitated towards a sort of visually rewarding architecture in the last 30 years instead of a physically rewarding architecture. And that's something which I think has had an enormous influence. It's something that we have tried to work with a lot in our practice. And of course, there are some times when the context, if you see Max Dudler's nice building here, he's a strong modern architect, but he took the opportunity of the physical context of the castle to inspire his building. So there's a clue. There are opportunities to find material, an intelligent idea to build in sandstone in a place of sandstone. So we can look for these physical contextuals. But this is Alaska, in the middle of Anchorage. There are no materials every material has been. So you don't always have easy ideas about what the physical qualities of a building might be. In this case, we were interested it's a museum in Anchorage. We were interested, given that the building could not rely on its strong physical materialization, we were interested in the questions of light and how the light would play, because the light in Alaska is extraordinary. This is a house in Berlin, one of our very first projects in Germany, and there we used brick. This was a social housing project in Madrid where there was no budget, and we used a very light concrete panel to try. So these projects are about, the physical qualities of architecture. Another housing project in London, and a museum in the north of England. I think this is, so in a way I want to use this one to move on. So the point I'm trying to get to in a way is that the way we judge architecture before it happens, and therefore the way it gets commissioned and considered, is often highly visual, but in the reality, the architecture is an experiential thing. It's how do you feel in the building. On the other hand, buildings have to look like something. They can't just be brick or concrete. They do have to have shape. They do have to have form. And while that might not be about novelty, and it might not only be about innovation, it can't only be about tradition. So we have to think in a genuine way about what gives shape to buildings. This is a museum we did, which was a building which had a great responsibility. It was in a very poor city, Wakefield. It's the birthplace of Barbara Hepworth, and it was to be a museum for Barbara Hepworth, for some of the early works of hers, and then a sort of city museum. It was in an industrial place, so the building had to have some strong presence. So what I was interested in doing was creating a room structure. Inside, the rooms are all slightly different shapes, and that structure, the spatial structure, which will be experiential as well, would convey itself as the formal structure. Just to repeat this, that if we're not careful, sorry, I should leave that a bit longer. If we're not careful, we substitute the rewards of a sort of the physical qualities and experiential qualities of architecture by image. And I would say that this is also a problem of technology, that we can no longer rely on the construction of a project to deliver quality. What do I mean? I would say that the industry, the construction industry, becomes more and more efficient, more and more effective, and less to do with making. It's about assembly. And this is logical. The qualities that we used to have from architecture, which was stone upon stone, someone making things, a window created, those qualities of being handmade and being assembled and having what we might call craftsmanship are no longer there. So we can't rely on that. Therefore, unless we try to compensate for that somehow, the construction industry will give us a very synthetic building if we don't play with that, if we don't think about that. So you have to work quite hard within the constraints, the real constraints of the efficiency and the let's say the directness of construction and the relatively economic pressures that are put on buildings. Often we are building, this is a studio for the sculptor Anthony Gormley. He had very little money for this project, so you have to think about where might you get those qualities. And I think the other thing is that we have to find ways by which buildings fit in, by which their materiality may have some contribution. This is in Innsbruck, the Kaufhaus Tirol on Maria Theresenstrasse in the center of Innsbruck, in the center of a historical city. The James Simon Gallery in Berlin, again, a project. These projects come out of a lot of work related to the context and to the program. In this case, the museum island didn't have certain facilities. It had no lecture hall. It didn't have any very decent shops. It had no centralized cafe. And it had an issue about how it managed large-scale tour groups. So this building became part of that. So it had a program, but at the same time, you have to find reasons by which the building form is justified. In this case, of course, we were trying to link in to the whole colonnade idea of the museum island. There are moments, of course, when buildings have to be more dynamic and more expressive. This is in the center of Mexico City. This is a private collector who wanted to give his, I'm just looking at my time, see how we're going, wanted to give his collection, well, not give the collection, but present the collection into the center of the city. In a way, he was trying to make a private collection into a sort of public building. And so we created a building where there is no real front door, because Mexico City has a problem with monitoring public space. We created this piazza, and then at the same time we made these rooms which have a sort of strong connection between inside and outside. So we are always looking for reasons by which the form of the building may respond to a social or a purposeful idea. In this case, the question that we posed for ourselves is, how do you make, in a city where the public space is unreliable and where there's no real experience of museums, how do you make a museum accessible? This is a cemetery in Japan, we completed not so long ago. Again, I would say the reason I'm showing these projects, sorry, but very quickly, because I don't want to go into too much detail, but in a way, the idea that the buildings can contribute in some sense to the place, to the activity, and to intensifying, in this case, the experience of visiting the graves of your ancestors. So how do we push, or how do we make sure that the role of the architect is not just a commercial one, not just one of a business, which of course it has to be as well. In order to run an office, you have to have you are a business. At the same time, how do we try to give that business some sort of social responsibility? The generation before me, I think, were very clearly ingrained in that responsibility. The public system was much more purposeful. And I would say, to some degree, I think Germany, Switzerland, Austria, there is much more, there's still a sort of sense that architects are working a lot for community and for public projects. So over these years, we've tried to work as much as possible for public projects. This is Zurich, Kunsthaus Zurich. It's sort of much easier when you work on a public building, because clearly the public buildings contribute something. It's much more difficult when you work for a private company. This is Seoul in South Korea. I don't think I have a stick. Do I have? Does this point? Yes, it does. This is the building we did. We were asked to build a tower like one of these, and I argued with the client in the competition that because the client wanted a real headquarters. It was a sort of third generation of a company, extremely nice man, extremely nice company, and he wanted to create a building for his staff. And I said that a tower, that what he was really trying to build was a home for his staff, and a tower would never allow that, because in a tower you have a lobby and then you have lots of floors. So we persuaded him to do a lower building, and by that, then the building has social space, and it becomes a place where people can work in a much more comfortable way. So this was an idea, even within a private building, even in a commercial building, how to create a sense of community and how to improve the working environment for them. And this became a very important project in Korea. It changed it increased the expectations of the workspace, I would say, which were very low before we did this building. And it was all down to the client, willing to push the offer that the building could give, not just as an image, but as a place to be. As architects, we have to learn how to take the privilege that we have doing projects and think about how every building might contribute. And I think that's true of clients as well. I mean, we are continuously pushing our clients and saying, we know this building is necessary from a commercial or a practical point of view, but at the same time, can we question, what does it give back to the city? It takes something away from the city, but what can it give back to the city? What can it give back socially? What can it give back environmentally? The biggest lesson I had in architecture, and in a way, the formative experience, was working on the Neues Museum in Berlin. And why? I think, first of all, because it was, of course, a philosophical question, rather like the discussion that has happened around this castle for many years. What do you do with a ruin? And in this case, it was clear that the ruin had to be put back as a museum. But the reconstruction was out of chronological sequence. In other words, the ruination, which happened during the war, was by this time 50 years behind. So you weren't addressing the tragedy of ruination after the event. You were doing it after a great interval, and an interval which had been occupied by other histories. The history of the GDR and the separation, the bifurcation of Berlin, etc., etc. And even the history of the ruin itself, which had become a sort of thing of great beauty. You know, buildings can become beautiful ruins, and this had become one. The reason the project was challenging was, in a way, my own fault, which was because I wasn't comfortable with the idea that reconstruction should be, as it could easily have been, a rebuilding and a literal reconstruction of what was lost. That was one of the options, and in a way, the popular option. And why not? If you've lost a building through a sort of tragedy like that, we have the drawings, we have the photographs. It would be possible, like it has been in so many other buildings after the war, to recreate a copy. And we insisted that this shouldn't be the case. It should be more carefully considered. It should be treated nearly as an archaeological object. And with an archaeological object, you keep everything that's survived, and you take care about how you complete it. Typical reconstruction projects tend to destroy that which has survived in the completion, and we tried not to. It meant that the project was highly debated, highly discussed, and highly polemic. But it also meant that I had to explain the project continuously. It was 6 years planning and 6 years construction, so it was 12 to 13 years project. And through that process, it was my responsibility, I saw it as my responsibility to explain the project. Because in a way, as a foreigner, I had to be extremely respectful for the fact that this was not my history. This is the history of Berlin, and therefore my role was not to say how something should happen. My role was to make sense of the issues, to understand the conflicting concerns. And I have to tell you, there were a lot of conflicting concerns, and the Berliners are not shy about expressing their opinions. They're extremely blunt in these matters. And for a shy and modest Englishman, I found this quite difficult at times. But it was an extraordinary process to bring people together. And you can imagine, curators had one idea, the Denkmalamt had another idea, the engineers had another idea, and it was like they were all fighting. The success of this project, from my perspective, was not the physical one, but it was the human one. The fact that we brought an enormous group of people together in common purpose, because to do this project was not something that could be done by an architect slamming his fist on the table saying, I want it done this way. I had to take the energy and the intelligence of and the different perspectives into the project. And there's many people involved in this process, from the general director to the president of the Stiftung, to the head of the Egyptian Museum, to the head of the Denkmalamt, who can take you around this building and explain it with as much pride as I can. You know, they were involved. So for me, it was a lesson of dialogue, participation, of the idea of trying to accept the responsibility to define a common idea, and that common idea should really be a common idea. It should represent, it should collect ideas together. This is just a sample of the enormous number of articles that were written at the time, or well, during the 12 years, we had, I think, 400 articles written about. But the Berliners queued for, there was 10,000 people standing up. I think they queued for 6 or 7 hours to come in, and we were extremely nervous about what their reaction would be. The guards were prepared and trained in case there was any trouble, because there'd been so much negative press about the project. And we, of course, were with turning stomachs, wondering what would happen. But in reality, it was well accepted. And so I can be, I can talk about it as a formalistic solution. I can talk about it as a philosophical idea about history and memory, but I can also talk about it as a sort of human idea, as a project which forced us to make collective decisions. And it trained us, because a decision isn't made by just having a meeting and saying, so what shall we do? We had to give shape to those decisions. We had to somehow lead the discussion, show the implications of decisions, that it's possible to do this, it's possible to do that, but let's realize that that's what happens. And what does that mean if we do this? And this was we were lucky, because the people we were talking with were, of course, highly articulate, highly intelligent, and highly engaged in the process. But we made the project important, and through that importance, I think the project came out in the way it did. And you can imagine the decisions that we have to make throughout this project. I mean, this is an original piece. This is fake. This is a stripped down version of that. This is half original and half copy. This is original, but this is not. So each piece of this had to be a discussion. It also had to be priced and had to be approved by the Ministry of Finance. So the bureaucratic process was extraordinarily complex, but that meant that the architect couldn't make these decisions themselves. We had to create an environment of trust. The environment of trust is one that we rarely have as architects. No one trusts us. We say we're going to build a new building instead of the old one, and we say, oh, no, please don't. So why not? Yeah, but you architects, you always say the building is going to be so nice, and then you build it and it's horrible. So we've lost our trust. So how do we get back this idea of trust? How do we show that responsibility? Because I think this is a big challenge for us. And I think that's partly because we're so often in the situation where we are not able as architects to give real question to the task. We have to fulfill tasks sometimes which we're not even sure are good questions. This was a very good question. This was restore Mies van der Rohe's National Gallery. I think we won the competition because of the trust that we had created in the Neues Museum. And I have to say, I think we were the right people to do such a task. And I'm not normally so immodest, but by this time my team had really become incredibly sophisticated about how to do restoration. The interesting question here was to treat a building from the 1960s as if it was a building from the 1860s. So all of a sudden, we transferred our care and concern about repairing a modern building in the way that we would have restored the Neues Museum, for instance. And those of you who are architects know that it's very easy in the repair of modern buildings to ruin them in the process. It's so easy because Mies van der Rohe designed window frames here that didn't work. I mean, there was no insulation. In most buildings, you could just replace those window frames and new ones. But it meant that the window frame that was about this big would be this big under contemporary environmental concerns. So you could solve the thermal problems of this building, but you destroy Mies in the process. So this wasn't a technical question only, this was a sort of philosophical question. And we negotiated this position between what does repair mean? What does repairing Mies van der Rohe's building mean? Does it mean making it perfect, perform in the way that it should be performing? Or what role does the Mies play? I mean, how sacred is Mies? And how much should we, as it were, protect him? And we became the protectors of Mies. And I said from the beginning that if it's possible to see that we've done anything at the end, then we failed. So it's a strange role for an architect to play. And a lot of my colleagues said, well, why would you do this? Because there's nothing for you to do. Which is not true, because sometimes not letting something be ruined can be maybe more powerful than building another building. I think the work we did on this building was a good contribution. Is it important that my name is everywhere? No, of course not. It's important that we looked after this building of high quality. And the way we treated it was literally I mean, it's very easy to throw this wood away and get a new one. But we repaired even broken stones. It would have been easy to throw these away, but we repaired them and replaced. We took 30,000 pieces of the building away, cleaned them, and brought them back. This is something that you might do with an 18th century building, but not normally with a 1960s building. And that was why I think the building process was interesting and why we got the building back. The reason that we did these things on Neues Museum, National Gallery, was not because of sustainability only. I mean, clearly, Neues Museum was not about sustainability. It was about memory. Berlin is still dealing with its own sense of itself. And especially Neues Museum was a project, post-war project, where the city is reflecting on its history. So this was about the importance of buildings and the importance of history. And we did many projects. This is in Friedrichstrasse, building a new building out of an old building. It's a publishing house. Previously, this is our office. So a lot of these projects in Berlin were very much to do with building within the context of a strong historical context. In a way, of course, they they did touch on the issue of reusing buildings, of being more considerate with material and how we use it. And in a way, those two stories come together very quickly. The story of memory, meaning, significance, and at the same time of resources, of continuity, and things like that. We've done a lot of projects from that, working on historical interventions with and thinking about how that might be done. So this is the Royal Academy, a new connection between two parts of the building, bringing a new wing into the building. Got the wrong. Okay, there's a slide missing. I wanted to show the point I wanted to show on this. This was a space that was a service space before, full of pipes and things. And so these projects are very much to do with making small interventions. There's no big vision. They're working with fabric. They're working with the history of the building, and they're trying to improve the workings and the experience of the building. This is in Paderborn, a building which we were asked to look at, a rather ugly reconstruction after the war from bomb damage. You can see, you've seen this type of post-war architecture all over Germany, and underneath there was a monastery, a cloister, and in this project, it was a rather strange one, we actually took it back to its sort of ruined state. We took off all of the things which had been changed after the war, and then built out of it again and found a sort of a stronger quality of it. This is a sort of tendency of reusing buildings, which is now, the German projects tended to be about memory and history, and of course, a sort of very significant history. We are moving more and more towards another topic, which of course is bound into this, which is the importance of reusing buildings. As I said before, we're not quite sure where we are in architecture in terms of sustainability. We don't have rules. It's an empirical process that we're learning all the time. It would be much easier if someone told us, use windows, wooden window frames, use this type of material, use this. Then those rules don't really exist. There's only one rule we know, absolutely clear, is that if you knock a building down, it's worse than using a building. So the best way of being sustainable is not building. And the second is to reuse a building that's there. Of course, we are used to the idea of improving buildings. We're used to the idea that we don't like buildings and let's take them down, and especially buildings of the 1960s. This is a government building in Paris. The mayor, Hidalgo, had a program to say that every time, if they were to sell public buildings, then they must, the investor must demonstrate a responsible environmental and social use for the building. So the program that the investor had to inherit, if they were to take it, was a kindergarten, a youth hostel, a market, as well as the commercial things with hotel and things like that. And so this is the project we did. Everyone hated the building beforehand. You can see that it's quite an ugly facade. We filled in this square so that the building came to the street, and we did nothing to the facades except upgrade them. You can see the same facades, and everyone said, "Oh, I love, it's great what you did to the facades." And we said, "We didn't do anything to the facades," but the context of upgrading is important. This is another project of reuse of a 1960s building. This was the Ministry of Interior in Doha, a building that everybody hated because there were lots of stories about what happened in this building, and we were commissioned to turn it into a hotel, It's now one of the best hotels there, and it's very strange, of course, because Doha has very little history, and all of a sudden they're quite proud the fact that this respected an existing building, and we didn't destroy it in the change. Though I would say there's a big shift now that everyone's somehow starting to appreciate that to make a new building out of an old building is no longer a sort of a compromise, but actually could be seen as a better solution. This is the American Embassy in Grosvenor Square. Again, we were commissioned, so you can just see we added a floor, well, 2 floors in fact, but we did it by imitating the Saarinen. This is by Saarinen. We didn't. We sort of stretched the facade. There's a strong tradition within modernism that whenever you add to a building, you should make something that looks different. And in many of the projects we're doing, we're trying to find some sort of continuity. Anyway, this is being finished, and this is for the London School of Economics, a very interesting case where the competition was to knock this building down. Everyone hates this building. It's an ugly building from 1958. It's ugly from the outside and it's ugly from the inside. And I said that if this is for the London School of Economics, this is meant to be a center of dialogue and debate. This would be a center of, political center. I said, I don't think you can knock it down. I think it would be very strange in 5 or 6 years' time to have knocked a building down that is ugly, but that you could have used it. So what we did was to show how we could transform it by keeping it, adding things. This is the section. You can see how impossible the interior was, different floor levels. There was every reason to knock it down, but we managed to convince them to reuse it. We're recycling it, and so it's being built now, and it's going to look like that. Interestingly, the difficulty was aesthetic, because the planners found it very difficult to enjoy the result, because their feeling was that, and in fact, the planners were nearly encouraging us to knock the building down and build a new one, because they were saying, you could build a better building. And we were saying, yeah, but ethically, we can't. Ethically, we can't build a better building, and we're convinced that the result, in the end, not to do with visual, but to do with the reality, and we're reusing all the materials. So this is something, 1014, this is a project that people in this room are involved with. It used to be the German ambassador's residence, then it became the Goethe Institute for 50 years, a very important piece of German real estate in a way, opposite the Metropolitan Museum. And obviously, we're going to reuse the building. We are reusing the building. The work has started, and this will be hosting the program of 1014, which, as the minister said earlier, a very opportune program at this particular point of promoting American-German relationships. The lower levels are public spaces for lectures and things like that. The top floors are to do with this students and researchers, see here, and then we created this idea of a sort of middle territory, a meeting ground between public and researchers, where the two different users could come together. Images of how, so public space, this is the common room, the common space, and literally common between the different types of users, and then this is for the residents at the top floor, and this is the building at the back. So we've expanded the building a bit, but again, it's not appropriate even to think about not reusing buildings like this. And I know I'm running late, but so these are thoughts about conventional practice. A conventional architectural practice is like a very big boat. You want to turn the wheel, but you turn the wheel, but it takes a very long time to steer. But within our conventional practices in London and Berlin, in Milan especially, we are trying to work with clients who are shifting their perspective. And I have to say, I'm very optimistic about this. We're really getting a lot of clients who are really taking on board the issue of reuse, of sustainability, et cetera, especially the idea of reuse. But we've also started to think about how we might think practice itself in a more structural way. I have for a long time been promoting this discussion. In 2012, I was director of the Architectural Biennale, and my Biennale was called Common Ground. And Common Ground was a challenge to my colleagues to say that the Biennale should no longer be a show-off ground, a sort of place where each architect proves that they're better than the other one. This is my opera house, and this is his theater, and this is it. I insisted that every project in Common Ground had to demonstrate what the architects were doing between colleagues or with community. And of course, it was quite difficult to get some of them to leave their egos behind, but generally they did. This is the plan of the exhibition. There was 120 different, I had to negotiate with 120 egos, but they were very, I must say, it was an interesting dialogue. I had to talk with each team all the time. This was Herzog Demeron, and they were interested in talking about the Philharmonie in Hamburg. At the time, it was stuck. On the back wall are all the articles fighting against the project. And then there were models of the project itself. So their contribution was not just to say, look how beautiful our Philharmonic Hall is. It was to say, let's discuss the issue of making a major public building in a sort of consensual way. And actually, this was quite an important exhibition for the dialogue that then pursued and made the project happen. Then 2020, I was editor of Domus, and again, I tried to promote the discussion about how the profession works together. I did a lot of interviews with other architects called Good Practice. I asked architects about, what do they think practice should be about? 10 minutes. How do we shift practice, and how do we shift towards process more than result? If we are going to look at sustainability, process becomes critical. We've looked at in all businesses in the past, supply chain was critical. Supply chain was about reliability. Then in certain businesses, especially in fashion and things like that, the supply chain came with about morality. Did these pair of trainers get made in by child labor in Pakistan or something like that? Now it's also to do with material. Where did this material come from? So we're now looking at, in all things, and I would say in architecture as well, where do these materials come from? And we're examining that a lot. So I think we're now shifting from a result-based attitude that we, as I said from the beginning, that we became in the last 30 years rather obsessed with how things look. We have to shift we have to relax about how things look, and we have to think more and more about how do we get there, and how do we deliver that? How does these things come? As was said before, we accidentally, my wife and I and our children, have been spending our summers in one of the most peculiar parts of Europe, the northwest corner of Spain, Galicia, above Portugal, is the corner. Finisterre is there. It's a semi-autonomous community, one of the autonomies of Spain, 2.5 million people. It's slightly forgotten. The Spanish generally think the Galicians are strange people, and there's a certain disrespect to them, I would say, in some ways, except when it comes to food. Anything which has come from this region would be advertised from coming. So if you have a menu in Madrid, the eggs are from Galicia, it will say Galician eggs. If the potatoes are from Galicia, Galician potatoes. If the shellfish, Galician. Galicia is a sign, is a mark. And why? It's a mark because it never industrialized its food production, which contributes slightly to its poor economic performance. It's a community, strangely, and coming from an Anglo-Saxon environment, and I think that's why we were so attracted to it 30 years ago and still are. In the Anglo-Saxon world, we've been taught that you only have happiness through money. And we were quite surprised to be in this community where the per capita GDP is about 23,000 euros. It's an extremely flat society. Everybody sort of operates within very similar, very tight financial differences. And yet there's a sort of 84% happiness factor. So it's a super happy community that doesn't have much money. Well, how does that work? As an Englishman, I didn't understand that, but I do now. It's blessed with an extraordinary nature, and it's a productive nature. But as I say, the production is small scale. It's actually been quite respectful for its natural environment, thank God. It's 70% forest, and there is a crisis of forest because it's a lot of eucalyptus, etc., etc. But where it hasn't been careful is in its urban development, and it's built in horrible ways without planning. And 7 years ago, the president, Alberto Feijó, asked me, "You're an architect, can't you tell us, tell us how we can stop doing these stupid things?" And he imagined that we would come with so I made a little team and we did some research, and he imagined that we would come back and say, well, you have to paint all the houses this color and you have to use this roof tile and you have to... Instead, we actually went to the basic issues. So it is a dispersed community. It's a village structure, but you have a lot of empty buildings, and you have a lot of places where the empty buildings and the urban condition conspire, and you have parking everywhere. You have cars which destroy the towns. So actually, instead of going back and telling him that he needed to have more rules about architecture, we said you need more rules about planning. You need more rules about traffic. You need more rules about the larger conditions. And so for 7 years, we've been working increasingly on this program. So we started with 2 or 3 people. Now we have 17. And we have an enormous number of commissions to do with not architecture, but environment. This is a typical historical condition. And this is how it looks now. I mean, just a travesty of lack of planning. We did a huge amount of work in researching why these things happened and how we might deal with them. We're working on a territorial plan because we realized that, like all of these things, and this is, I guess, the principle of what I'm saying, is that we need planning more than we need architecture. We need planning that considers public space, the common good, environment, sustainability, and social welfare. We need to think about those things in a round way. We've managed to engage with the government. We work with, sometimes we challenge the local administration. We work with the mayors, we work with the community, and we very much work on the front line. So we work with the people at the front. We work with mayors and we work with the communities, because without their integration, you can't get anything. So it's, in a way, it's a continuation of Neues Museum in some way, in the sense that it is about physical environment, but at the same time, you need participation, and you need everybody to have a sort of common understanding. This is a typical small town close to where we live, and these towns had a very beautiful relationship with the sea. Then the roads came along, and so, for instance, this village is very isolated with this horrible concrete wall, parking, all sorts of decisions which were badly done. We're doing two projects. One is to reduce traffic, and the other is to create a better relationship between the town and the water. The road is so bad, it's nearly impossible to cross. But as soon as we proposed that we would slow traffic down, all the people in the village complained, because why should they not be able to drive fast? So then you have to have meetings on a Tuesday night, explain to everybody why we want to stop the road from 50 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers, why we want to move the parking from there to there. At this point, then everyone starts to agree, and then we get buy-in. So this is one of my team, you can see the type, we do hundreds of community meetings. Then we do the planning, and then this is the result. We opened last year. We created a new relationship between the wall and the village and the water. It's a tiny project. In a way, it's not architecture, but it needs the skills of architects to do this, and the collaborative idea. We had to work with the regional government, with the local mayor, with the ports authorities, with the fishermen, with the bar, the restaurant owners, etc., etc. It's an issue of common collaboration. So streets in these towns look like this, and now they look like this. So we're arguing that this is destroying. It's the same village to get from this side to there. So we are doing analysis. We are doing the planning. We bring the planning to a certain level, because the public system, the public administration doesn't have the money to do it. So we do it, and then we bring that to the planners, and now that project is now underway. And as a continuation of this, we're doing research into transportation systems. So we are looking at how can we invent a more complex public bus system that will take pressure off of the road system. There is no proper bus system at the moment. There's one bus that goes from here to there, and there's no distributing system. So these are projects that architects we as architects finding ourselves doing it, which is a sort of peculiar thing to do at this point of one's career. However, it seems to me that these are projects which start to use the talents of architects in a more purposeful way. And interestingly, the team I have, they're all architects, and I have been apologizing to them for 6 or 7 years that they're architects, they're skilled architects, they're talented architects, but they're not building. They are helping things happen. And they have to be convinced that they're doing more by protecting, by making things happen than by doing it themselves. The extreme version of that is that we also monitor competitions for other architects. The architectural competition system is so poor. I'm saying things politically I'm not allowed to say when I'm there, but the Chamber of Architects has not made competitions properly. And so what we do now is whenever we're asked to be involved in something, we refuse to be architects, but instead we design the competition. So this is a project for the refurbishment of a forestry research center. The government came to us and said, would you help us do the project? And we said no, because you haven't thought about the question properly, and we will think about the question. So we will design the question. So then this is the call for competition. This is the concorso, what it's for, what the prizes are, and we supervise this process. So this is the building, and the administration was going to surrender the program of this, which is a very serious research center. There isn't enough money, so they wanted to make it into a hotel. And we said, no, you can't do that. You've got to revive and the whole timber research thing, which is the most important thing to do. And that competition has been won now, and it's about to happen. This is another competition which we organized. A lot of abandoned villages, so we're working on 2 abandoned villages. So I'm going to flip through these very quickly. Another competition which we organized, which is now happening, Marine Research Center in Vigo. Again, these are the architects. They sit for all their time in these these types of meetings, negotiating. This was the competition winner of that one. We then organized public exhibitions of the competitions, because in a way, our initiative depends on the success. We have been luckily supported now by Inditex. Inditex are the company that own Zara, and the Marta Ortega, who's now the new CEO, is supporting us, and she's sponsoring 4 competitions we're now announcing. This is one of them in a rural area. This is another competition we're about to announce, which is the reorganization. Look, I talked to you about traffic. This is, how do you make a nice city when this happens? So we're doing a competition now playing. We have stepped back from being architects, but we are trying to make the conditions for which planning and projects can be done instead. Why am I showing you? Another competition. This is a really nice one. They want to do an industrial center, and typically they would just build sheds, but the mayor has agreed that they will build small buildings. So, we are influencing the question. The answers people give are always dependent on the quality of the question, and competitions, often the question isn't considered. So we are affecting the question that the communities ask, the politicians ask, which hopefully gives us better answers. These are some of the these are the abandoned villages we're working on. Again, we do all of the analysis. We work on the physical issues of the place. This was a small thing that was won. They've done a little social building for the village. From this, we've strangely finding ourselves more and more involved in the rural areas, because we've, as architects in the last 30 years, we've concentrated on cities, but we've neglected the other bit, which is the rural. We're working with the University of Santiago on a lot of programs. We have a fire issue, which comes from uncontrolled forest. We do a lot of, Bank of Santander supported us in doing some research with the local communities, how they lived in the forest and how that might work. There's a publication we did from that lesson. So when we were sustainable, of course, we're learning that our concept of progress is changing, and we're starting to see that so many of the things, especially in the productive landscape, so many things were done better before. They knew how to enrich the soil. They knew how to rotate crops. They knew how to look after things. We are organizing applications for European grants. We just got this community 1.2 million. We applied for grants for improving their small-scale agricultural systems. A community like this is incapable of applying the paperwork. The paperwork is so complex that they can't do it. So we spent 1 year applying for the paperwork, getting them the grant. Oh, yes, thank you. We managed to get them one. Yeah, I'm going to finish. So we applied for the money for them. It represents a sort of 20% increase on their total annual budget. And this was celebrating that fact, and these are the different things we're doing. And after we got them the money, they then refused to do it because they couldn't administer the money. So now we're administering these grants for them. So you realize that there is a requirement for agencies to work in these communities. And these are the things that we're starting to do as architects. And just finally, this is our new headquarters. We realized that the activities that we're doing in these projects had limitations. We were being asked to do too many things. We became like a sort of a doctor. People just call us and say, we have a problem in our village, what do we do? We can't manage it all, so now we have a building. It's this one here. And in that building, we have a public floor, exhibition, canteen, then conference spaces, and then offices, and then a residential program for students. This is the garden side. So we're running project programs, research. We're bringing students at the moment. We've got a team from students from MIT. We give them real projects because we have all of these real projects. So they actually meet the mayors, they meet the community, and they deal with the issues. Here they're meeting fishermen. Then we have an exhibition space. So this is an exhibition where we're talking about the whole issue of circular economy. And then we have events. So at the moment, we've got a series of events related to the importance of the food market. So the Galician food market, there are 97 food markets in Galicia. And of course, the buying of fresh food is becoming more complicated in our contemporary life. And we're trying to make sure that this sustains itself. So we're running programs, urban programs. This is our conference space. We bring people together on very different topics, and the topics are connected about the environment. Every house needs a kitchen, and our kitchen is really important for us. So this is part of the reason that people come to the building. We feed all of our staff, and also we are increasingly doing because the food is all local food. It's all come within 20 kilometers. And there's a sort of, this is Carolyn Steele, who came the other week. She talks a lot about the importance of food. These are young people who are producing yogurts and things. I mean, so we've become part of a discussion about not just the built environment, but in a sense, the economies which relate to maintaining that community. And then this is an event which is going on one evening. And then just finally, of course, so I didn't want to finish only on our foundation because, of course, that's taking up a lot of my time. But at the same time, we are doing many other projects. This is the Archaeological Museum in Athens. And going back to my first story, I don't think we can abandon, nor should we abandon, the importance of architecture itself. But we have to find ways by which the profession and our skills are applied more thoughtfully to what we build, where we build, and how we build it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went over. I like this one. I've left you Corbusier.
Your applause. Thank you very much for this inspiration and this fantastic presentation of your work and your foundation and your ideas. Normally, we finish this evening at that time. And I'm not quite sure if all of you are able to follow the interview now. I have only 6 pages of questions I have prepared, but I think I will only ask you a few things. One of them is that I personally would like to thank you very much for insisting that the work of architects is full of responsibilities and opportunities to make the world a better place. And you use 2 words very often. One is responsibility and the other is sustainability. And if you look back to 40 years of being an architect, this year I would be interested to hear how intensively your attitude to architecture changed from the aesthetic point of view to the sustainable point of view. I got the impression this is a learning system you did. Could you tell us something about that? And maybe can you tell us if you would choose the profession once again, and if you could recommend to the younger people to choose the profession in the moment?
Absolutely. I think the training we have gives us the opportunity to work in a more horizontal way than most. We can see the consequences of things, and we're also worried about the consequences. So if I take an example like this village with the road destroying the village, my argument was immediately with the Minister of Urbanism to say, this is crazy, we should do something about this. Oh, it's fine, I've got one here. What service, thank you.
That's a good idea.
Sorry, thank you so much. If I take a village which is being destroyed by a road, I talk to the Minister of Urbanism. And she says, yeah, I agree with you, David, but it's not me. So who is it? It's traffic. Okay, so you go to the Minister of Traffic. What's the problem? The road. The road's fine. Yeah, but it's destroying the village. Not my problem. So, and you can multiply that all the time. Architects are strange because we think that, I mean, I'm not interested in traffic. I have no interest in traffic whatsoever. I hate the stuff. But you need to be involved in traffic in order to think about urbanism. You can't solve so many of the things of the city without getting involved in traffic. And certainly there, traffic there. Then you get even further, that there are 30% empty buildings in some of these towns. Not just the empty villages, but the towns. What's the point of making a new square if all the buildings are empty? So then it's an economic issue. How can this region become economically stronger? So that's where the foundation, but we started with the physical, and then we ended up with the environmental, and then we commercial. So I think the training we have as architects gives us that opportunity. So I would advocate that as a profession for a young generation. I think it's fantastic. What they shouldn't be thinking about is the model that we created, my generation. Our model is no longer relevant, in my opinion. I think this is, and when you say move from aesthetic to sort of moral, not really. I still believe in the beauty of things. I still believe that things must be made well. I still believe in the exaggeration of the physical and the consideration that you should put into making things. But I don't believe that that should be so detached from the societal thing. If you think about the Bauhaus, what did the Bauhaus say? The Bauhaus said, let's integrate beauty into industrial processes so that we can produce the most beautiful objects for the lowest price for the most people. Now what is design for? Design is to make the simplest object more expensive. If a glass has my name on it, it's 3 times more. I mean, that's not a comfortable place for a designer to be. That we give added value not to the people, but to the industry. Now that's a sort of strange, place that we've been pushed in, and I think we need to try to find our way back. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be involved in beauty. We shouldn't be involved in aesthetics. It's just we have to question where we've come in 40 years. Not just architects, but all of us. I mean, society has become, we've become seduced by consumerism. We don't have things anymore that we need. We have things that we want. And we're being, in order to participate, we have to buy more. And the planet's, so the economy is telling us we have to consume, and the planet's telling us that we should not consume, or consume more carefully. And that's why we locate in Galicia, because it's not, there's 2 reasons. One is we can see the result. You press a button here and you can see the result. In London, I can't see that. And the second thing is, it's quite a raw community that is not obsessed, that gets happiness out of things, the things in front of you.
Thank you. Your sense of responsibility is such a strong influence, I suppose. I'd be interested to know where or when it began. Perhaps you can tell us a little of your beginning, about your early years, where you grew up, and your experiences at school, which may have inspired you to become an architect.
I think sense of responsibility comes out of a sense of privilege.
You said before you have been modest and shy.
Well, no, I think that those of us that have privilege should inherit responsibility with that privilege. And, you know, I'm extraordinarily privileged in terms of the fact that professionally I've had opportunities which are way beyond anything I ever imagined. I have, I'm not rich, but I have financial comfort way beyond everything I imagined. And therefore, at a certain point in one's life, maybe too late, maybe I should have been, you know, more responsible earlier, but I think at a certain point in your life, you've actually got to think very hard about what you do with this privilege. And I'm not a saint, I'm not a martyr or a saint. I mean, I have an extremely comfortable life. My life is full of hypocrisy. I mean, I talk about these things, but at the same time, I fly around and I stay in luxury hotels occasionally, and you know, so I'm not, I'm not a model in any way. I'm just saying, from my privileged position, maybe I can do certain things, and maybe that might, given I have a voice in architecture, I've chosen to use that voice in a community that I can use it, because I can get meetings with people and I can get things done, and so that's another privilege. And not to use that, I think Dante had a circle of hell dedicated to people who didn't fulfill their opportunities, and that I don't want to be in that circle. I might be in another one for other reasons, but not. I don't want to be in that one.
Thank you. I'm interested in your management style. You have 4 offices situated in 4 different... Five. Count Galicia as well, okay.
It's 20 people now.
5 different cultures all around the world. How do you manage working with different international teams? How do you communicate with them? Are you going to them regularly to visit all the offices, or do it in the...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I work with really good people. Secondly, there was not a sort of commercial decisions. These were always cultural ones. The reason I mean, first of it, it's the worst thing to do is to open another office. It makes your life much more complicated. There's no way. So I wouldn't, I never wanted to do that. But, you know, I had an office in London. I always worked outside of London. I worked in Japan for 3 years, 4 years. We did competitions in Italy, and then we did some work in Germany. Fritz Auer came tonight. I want to thank Fritz.
Hey, he's in the audience.
He's one of the people that invited me in Germany many, many years ago. But Germany became an opportunity. We did the Neues Museum. My idea was to close the office after the Neues Museum, but at this point we had 40 incredibly talented people. So, and by this time you have a strong relationship with the place, so why you can't take it down. We won a lot of competitions in Italy, and I had a partner in London who wanted to move to Italy to supervise them. So, okay, why not? Et cetera, et cetera. So it happens this way. But you know, I give away an enormous amount of responsibility, an enormous amount of trust. But I think the trust is sort of a reciprocal trust. So I'm working with them every week, and we have
Is it easy for you to delegate?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think the problem is architects, I mean, we're torn because we worry about every detail. You know, how is, I don't like this. You've got to, but you can't run an office doing that all the time. So you've got to find ways by saying, let me look at this at that point. Let me, you know. So you have to have methods by which you can inspire and create an environment, and you also you have to accept that some things won't go quite right. So, but that means I think it's the same as the whole project. I mean, I think the position being an architect is, in a way, creating directions. And I mean, life doesn't depend on that. You know, but you should worry about it, but life doesn't depend on that. So it depends on something else first, but ultimately you should get down to this. But you can't start there, and you can't get stuck on that.
It's quite interesting. I read in an interview that you once said that you feel yourself as the conductor of an orchestra, so to speak, and that you don't like the cult of personality. Architecture for you is a group effort. You spoke about this even this evening. But everything what happens is under the name of David Chipperfield Architects. Is this a contradiction?
It's a hypocrisy. I put my hand up. Of course, and it's the way that things are working. And I'm here, tonight. But this is not the comfortable place for me. This is not. I don't like spending too much time in this type of situation. I'm much happier in the office with others, and I'm much happier empowering others to do things. You can't do things on. I mean, I think that's architects now have to be strategic. You need sort of to have a sort of strategic, and I think it's good because I think it means you have to put bigger ideas. That I am completely convinced that you must give importance to the small and the everyday and the normal, because that's what life is about. It's not about something it's about things which are in front of you. The house you live in, the kitchen table when you have your breakfast in the morning, the school where you take your children, the street, the square, the coffee shop. That's what architects, and planners should be, and to heighten the everyday. So I'm not underestimating at all. I think it's totally fundamental. And I worked in 3 years in Japan, and this is what I loved in Japan: the idea that everything had a sort of importance and consideration. But at the same time, as architects, you've got to create the environment within which something can happen. And that requires a sort of a strategic presence and a strategic attitude.
Thank you very much. Normally, I ask for questions from the audience. If you allow, we shouldn't do it tonight because it's too late, and maybe these pictures of the kitchens you saw before with the glasses and with the food on the table gives an idea what happens now downstairs in the wine cellar. I want to say thank you very much to you, and I beg your pardon that we haven't any time for more questions tonight.
It's my fault. Sorry.
Please join me in thanking Sir David for this wonderful evening. Thank you very much, David. And if you allow, I also would like to especially thank to Bernd Müller, who did a great job. And I want to thank the members of the organization team, the technicians here at the Heidelberg Castle, and also David's team for helping to organize this event. We had contact all over the country borders. And last but not least, I thank you in the audience for your interest and for your coming tonight. And maybe we meet later down there in the cellar. Thank you very much.
Es gibt noch viel zu sagen, aber jetzt sagen wir nichts mehr, sondern nur noch ganz, ganz großen Dank auch an dich, Wolfgang, David, für diesen wunderbaren Abend. Und wie immer besteht nun die Möglichkeit, im Fasskeller bei einem Glas Wein oder Bier die Heidelberger Schlossgespräche reden über Architektur fortzusetzen. Die Protagonisten des Abends kommen in Kürze dazu. Ankündigen möchte ich Ihnen schon jetzt unsere Herbstveranstaltung. Die 26. Heidelberger Schlossgespräche finden am 5. November 2025 wieder mit einem sehr renommierten internationalen Stargast statt. Aus Chicago kommen zu uns nach Heidelberg, die ja auch Architektin des Jahres, Jean Gang, am 5. November 2025. Bis dahin bleiben Sie alle gesund und kommen Sie gut nach Hause.